Due uomini in abito elegante si stringono la mano. Uno dei due è in fiamme. Bastano queste poche parole per richiamare alla mente una delle copertine più iconiche della storia del rock. Stiamo parlando di Wish You Were Here, album pubblicato dai Pink Floyd nel 1975. E oggi, dopo aver raccontato l'America attraverso le canzoni di Bruce Springsteen, sulle frequenze di Rock or Dust viene a trovarci un ospite davvero speciale. Stiamo parlando di Aubrey Powell. Il suo nome è indelebilmente legato all'arte dei Pink Floyd. La sua firma, insieme a quella di Storm Thorgerson, è sotto alcune delle copertine più iconiche della storia del gruppo. Abbiamo sicuramente Dark Side of the Moon, 1972, Animals, con l'iconico maiale che vola al di sopra della Battersea Power Station, che l'anno prossimo compirà 50 anni, l'indimenticabile The Wall. Con lui abbiamo raccontato la storia delle cover di Wish You Were Here ed Animals e soprattutto abbiamo scoperto quanto siano ancora attuali, nonostante i 50 anni dei due dischi. Se non ci conoscessimo, sono Corrado Parlati e ti do il mio più caloroso benvenuto su Rock or Dust. Non parliamo di musica per ricordare il passato, parliamo di musica per capire chi siamo oggi, come siamo arrivati fin qui, perché certi dischi continuano a far male, anche dopo anni. Rock or Dust, se qualcosa resta, non è polvere.
Well, in the late 1960s, or middle to late 1960s, I mean, music in England was incredible. We'd had a period from the Beatles from 1962, 63, then going into the mod age with bands like the Small Faces and the Who. And then along comes a kind of revolution in terms of art and music and fashion uh, around between 65 to 69, around that period. But 1967 was really the turning point. It was the year of love and music, peace and love. And it was the time when bands like Pink Floyd, Soft Machine, uh, King Crimson, those kind of bands were starting to come to the fore in the underground of London. They were not particularly popular, I have to say. They were only popular with a small group of people who were like-minded, like myself and Storm Thorgerson in Hypnosis. We recognized that there was time for a change. And at that time, revolution was in the air. You know, we had huge riots against the Vietnam War in Grosvenor Square outside the American Embassy. You had a lot of things going on in Paris, Milan, in Italy, Germany. You know, there was a general uprising of youth. And I suppose we felt part of the zeitgeist. We were part of that, and we happened to be involved in visuals, in photography of a different sort. And so we felt very much a part of the language that was being spoken at the time by the youth movement. Everybody, you know, between kind of 16 to 25 was heavily involved in these changes, particularly in London and the main cities in Europe. The thing about Wish You Were Here, it comes from Roger Waters, his lyrics, and a feeling in the band as a whole, but primarily it was about the insincerity of the music industry. It's not just about Syd Barrett and the loss of Syd Barrett. It's true to say that the title Wish You Were Here has a double meaning. It's a double pun, if you like. One, it reflects on Syd Barrett, who retired from Pink Floyd after an overdose of LSD. He was too ill to carry on, which was very sad for everybody. So there was a huge loss. He was the main singer-songwriter with Pink Floyd, and also he was a wonderful person. And he changed overnight to be this reclusive, introspective person who could not accomplish anything anymore. So it was about the loss of Syd, but also it was more about, I think, the insincerity of the music industry and how the need for endless hit singles and hit albums put a huge pressure on music artists at that time, and unnecessarily so. But the greed of the record companies was very apparent. And as Roger Waters says in the lyrics of Have a Cigar, the head of Capitol Records at the time, when he welcomed Pink Floyd into Los Angeles, said, by the way, which one is Pink? He didn't even know that Pink Floyd was the name of the group. He thought one of the men, and that shows the kind of insincerity, the lack of knowledge, the lack of comfort, the lack of guidance, the lack of any a sort of, I suppose, psychological comfort to the pressures that underwent any rock and roll band, who were young, 19 to 25, touring all the time. I mean, if you look at the Pink Floyd schedules of that time, I mean, it was relentless. They'd be in America for 6 weeks, then they'd be in Japan, then they'd be in Germany, then they'd be in England. They were playing 250 gigs a year, plus having to record, plus having to write. So this was very much the feeling. Plus, there is a saying in English, wish you were here, which comes from seaside postcards. Seaside postcards traditionally in places like Blackpool or Margate, seaside towns, you would send a postcard to somebody, and on the front it would say, wish you were here. So it refers to people who the loss of somebody, I'm here but you're not.
Yeah.
So it's a well-known English piece of parlance. So based on that, when hypnosis came up with ideas, and I remember distinctly sitting around, we'd heard the music in Abbey Road Studios, and of course we were very close friends with Pink Floyd because we all came from Cambridge together.
Yes.
Storm and I were sitting around with our graphics guy called George Hardy, who was very good. He was the guy who actually drew Dark Side of the Moon for us because we couldn't draw that accurately. And he said something about, when people are in business and there's a lack of sincerity, somebody's going to get burnt, aren't they? And Storm turned around and said, what about two businessmen shaking hands on a deal and one of them's on fire? It was as simple as that. So anyway, then we drew up these four images, which is earth, fire, air, and water, which is just a side thing, really.
Yeah.
But it was the two men shaking hands. One of them was on fire, absence of sincerity. Then we did the diver at the back who's diving into the water in Mono Lake. And that is an image which there's no ripples and there's no retouching. We didn't have digital facilities in those days, so I shot it for real. And the fact that there's no ripples in the water or no splash is a symbolic image of absence. Then we had the scarf, red scarf on the back, which was billowing, and behind it you can vaguely see the image of a woman, very, very slight in that. And again, this is about absence of imagery. Are you there? Aren't you there? Wish you were here, not sure. And then, of course, we had the image of the invisible businessman, record company businessman, standing in sand dunes in the Umar Desert with his briefcase and suit and all this kind of thing. And again, the record industry people were not really there. They were there when it came to when it came to dollars and cents, but they weren't there in terms of care. All they were interested in was the money. So that's where all those images came from when Hypnosis were thinking up ideas. We presented to the band at Abbey Road Studios, and Roger Waters had collected everybody in Abbey Road at that time. Any musician, he'd collected the cleaner for the floor. He collected the people who worked in the canteen who were doing the cooking. And Storm had to do a presentation of these drawings. He was better at doing that than me. We got a round of applause at the end of it, and David and Roger and Rick and Nick said, just go and do it, man. So Storm didn't leave England at that time because he was looking after his young son, and I took all the photographs for Hypnosis anyway. So I left, went to California, went to Los Angeles and started to set up the photographs. And I spent a month doing those photographs and looking for the right locations and the right people and the right stuntmen and all the rest of it. And the rest is history. I got the great shot of the two men shaking hands, and one of them's on fire for real. And still to this day, it resonates as one of the great album covers of all time. And I bless Pink Floyd for giving me the opportunity to do that. It was fantastic. Well, Storm did Division Bell, so that really has nothing to do with me, actually, because we had separated as Hypnosis at that time. We were not partnership. We were not in a partnership then. But I can speak freely about Wish You Were Here and Animals, the pig over the power station.
Yes.
I would say both those album covers were intrinsic to the legacy of Hypnosis and Pink Floyd. And one I have explained about Wish You Were Here and the importance of that album cover symbolically. And I think that definitely still applies to today. I think you've only got to look at the political situation that is going on in England, America, for example,
Also Italy.
and also Italy. Yes, that's true. The lack of transparency, the lack of reality, the care for people as a population is just not there. The leaders of these countries are more intent on their own survival and their own interest with their own parties than you know, creating a, a community within their countries that will all works together. I mean, you look at America, it's so divisive at the moment. And I think so the symbol of the two men shaking hands, and one of them is getting burnt, is still very relevant to today. The image of the pig over the power station floating above this tremendous symbol of wealth and I suppose social social upheaval was an idea from Roger Waters. It was not from Hypnosis, but he showed it to me and said, "Do you think we can do this?" And I went with him to Battersea Power Station, which was in awful shape at that time. It had not been used properly for many years. There was only one generator working there. All around it was piles of detritus and old cars and you could just walk in there. It was not a
Yes.
not a big deal. And he felt this represented very much a symbol, a giant sort of symbol of capitalism, which in a sense all around was crumbling. It was falling apart. And the interior was falling apart. And I think he felt with Animals, which, as you know, is based on Orwell's book,
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm, was an appropriate place to shoot something. Now, he had had this big inflatable pig made to fly above their shows and above the tour that they were going to go do in America called In the Flesh, which was a tour of animals. And he said to me, "Do you think we could fly this above the Battersea Power Station?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure we can." And so anyway, I said, "Let me sort it out." So I did, arranged everything with the Pink Floyd road crew, with photographers. I had, I think, 8 different photographers. We had a film crew, we had helicopters, everything. And I think everybody knows the story about on the second day of filming, the pig broke away from the rope that held it to the ground and flew into the air lanes of Heathrow Airport. All flights were cancelled. They sent fighter jets up to see if they could find it, but of course it was made of plastic, so it didn't show on the radar. And I was arrested for being in charge of an unidentified flying object, which is pretty funny, a UFO.
UFO.
Taken to Hypnosis Studio to wait there, hopefully that somebody would phone because it was all over the radio and television. "Please call this number if you see this pig." And the disruption at Heathrow was unbelievable. I thought I was in deep trouble. Anyway, the at 9 o'clock at night, the phone rang in Hypnosis Studio. I was there with two policemen, and I answered, and it was a farmer in an area of south of England, and he had found the pig floating around in his farmyard, upsetting his cows. So he said, "Can you come and get it?" So wrote the Pink Floyd road crew, went down, put it back into the truck, deflated, brought it back to London, and next morning at 6 o'clock we went back to the power station. What is incredible, if I look at the health and safety rules these days with every country, you could never do this again.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything. I telephoned the police and said, "Look, we're going to launch the pig again. We've solved the problem. It won't fly away this time." They said, "Oh, well, we don't care, but you need to have a marksman there with a gun to shoot it out of the sky." Well, a tiny little bullet going into an inflatable pig that was 45 foot long by 25 feet high is not going to shoot it out of the sky. But
Yeah.
anyway, they demanded that, so that was okay. And the CAA, which was the Civil Aviation Authority, they just said, "Don't fly above 500 feet." So, I mean, who does that in this day and age? It could never happen. You know, you'd be banned from
Yeah.
ever doing anything else again. So we did it for the last day. And of course, we found that the sky from the first day of filming was incredible, like a painting, and the pig from the last day of filming was in the right position. So in the end, I collaged the pig from the last day, the third day, onto the sky for the first day. I could have done that anyway without actually creating this. I could have done it as a separate collage without having to go through all the rigmarole of losing the pig. But the resulting public relations and press and television coverage globally was unbelievable. And of course, everybody said, "Oh, you must have done it on purpose." But I didn't. I didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident and terribly frightening for me because I thought maybe it would be the worst aviation disaster in history. However, all was well. And even to this day, uh, the pig has become, over the power station, has become an iconic symbol for London and is used all over the place as a symbol
Yeah.
for an interesting thing related to Pink Floyd and to London. So I'm very flattered by that. It's fantastic that I was associated and photographed that picture. Well, first of all, I'd choose Led Zeppelin Presence, which is the black object sitting on a table with a family having supper at a boat show. I mean, a more surreal idea away from the heavy rock image of Led Zeppelin you couldn't possibly imagine. But Jimmy Page, the very bright man, he got that immediately he saw it. I showed him the black object in a hotel room, and he said, "Is that it?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "It's represents the power of Led Zeppelin, right?" I said, "That's it. Yeah, absolutely." He said, "Fantastic. I love it. Let's do it." Robert Plant, the same. It was exactly perfect. I had a very good relationship. I still have a very good relationship with all the clients I ever worked with, whether they're 10cc, whether it's Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, or whether it's David Gilmour and Roger Waters. I still have great relationships with all these people, which is, proves the test of time, how successful everything was. Anyway, that album cover, Presence, is one of my most favorite album covers. Another album cover, I suppose, well, definitely Wish You Were Here has to be, because I have such fond memories of filming that and photographing that, doing The Man on Fire and spending, in those days for a band to say you can spend a month in Los Angeles getting this right and photographing it all wherever you want and taking private planes to find the right locations and everything. I mean, that wouldn't happen these days. Maybe for Taylor Swift, maybe for Madonna, maybe for huge, really huge rock band. Yes, it probably would happen today, but in those days it was unheard of to spend that kind of money. I think Wish You Were Here cost $50,000 in those days, which was the equivalent probably of $300,000 today, something like that. So anyway, So yes, that would be certainly top of my list there. I think the other cover that I have to mention, which is nothing to do with any of those bands, but was a turning point for hypnosis, was for a band called The Nice. And it was a cover called Elegy. And it was 50 red footballs in the Sahara Desert, south of Morocco. And this idea at the time of an album cover being shot in Morocco was unheard of. I mean, the record company couldn't believe their ears when I presented the idea, and categorically no. But Keith Emerson, who was the lead uh, musician in The Nice, he insisted, and I think even the band had to contribute to the cost of doing it. And of course, it was a very exciting adventure. Sorry, just one second. Of course, it was a very exciting adventure at the time to go down to Morocco and down to the Sahara to shoot this picture. But uh, when we were doing it, the light and the balls, it was a very complicated. It was just myself and Storm with these inflatable footballs. When the sun went down and we got that amazing light and you saw the balls of the desert, it was the first time for hypnosis that we realized that we could do land art. We could do any image on an album cover that did not have to have a photograph of the band, did not have to have any text on it, did not have to have the name of the record or the name of the band. It was the first time it suddenly occurred to us, this is art,
Yeah.
and we can create art. And so from that moment onwards, we only presented ideas to rock and roll bands that we liked, not thinking about their success or the record company making money or anything like that. And of course, the record companies didn't like us at all. I remember when we did the picture for Atom Heart Mother of the cow for Pink Floyd, which I think would be my fourth favorite, if you like. Um, they were absolutely incensed with rage that there was no name of the band on it. There was just a picture of a cow, and what's this got to do with the music and blah, blah, blah. Very uptight, conservative, boring attitude. And, luckily Pink Floyd said, no, that's the album cover, and this is Hypnosis's work, and it's terrific. And that is definitely an anti-album cover statement to have a picture of a cow. And it's not about anything. It's a piece of Dadaist art. It's not related to anything. It's just a wonderful picture of a cow. It's a portrait, you know. So those would be my favorite album covers. Yeah.